Welcome, members, to the Windsor Framework Statutory Committee. And can I just inform members, just before we begin, that mobile devices are permitted, provided they are muted and on airplane mode, and tablets and laptops should only be used for committee business during our meeting. And can I just advise members that we have online Owen Tennyson, who's due to be online, but at the moment we have Emma Sheeran and Jonathan Buckley online. And Jonathan, you're okay? You can hear us? Yeah, thank you. And just likewise, members, just before we begin, on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank Suzanne Walsh for all her work since the committee was established. She's now leaving us, unfortunately, and she's moving on to the business office. So just to give her the best wishes. I really appreciate all her work with us on the committee. And just in relation to item 1 on the agenda, apologies, just to advise members that we have received apologies from Kate Nicholl.
Okay.
And in relation to item 2 on the agenda, declaration of members' interest, just to remind members that they are obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interests. If anyone has any interest to declare, they should do so at the start of the relevant agenda item. Just moving on then to item number 3, draft minutes. Can I refer members to draft minutes of proceedings at page 6 to 16 of your meeting pack? Are members content that the draft minutes of the meeting on the 18th of September 2025 are a true reflection of proceedings?
Great.
Agreed. Thank you, members. Item number 4, matters arising. There are no matters arising. So we'll swiftly then move on to item number 5 on the agenda. Item number 5, Federation of Small Businesses, Windsor Framework Realities, Barriers to Trade in the UK Internal Market. Can I inform members that this item will be recorded by Hansard? And can I refer members to the relevant papers at pages 18 to 173 of your meeting pack? If you can recall, members, that on the 26th of June 2025, the committee considered a report from the Federation of Small Businesses following a survey of the views of businesses in relation to the Windsor Framework. The committee agreed to invite representatives of the Federation of Small Businesses to present the findings of that report to the committee, and a copy of the report can be found at pages 25 to 114 of your meeting pack. Just to inform members that the Federation of Small Businesses also presented the report to the Committee of the Economy in July. The Committee for the Economy discussed a range of issues related to the implementation of the Windsor Framework, which sit within its remit. Following that session, the Committee for the Economy corresponded with the Secretary of State, the Office for the Internal Market, and the Federation of Small Businesses themselves, and copies of each letters and the responses to them can be found from pages 115 to 132 of your meeting pack. And likewise, myself, the Deputy Chairperson, David Brooks, and myself had met with the Federation of Small Businesses back in February of this year to discuss the work of the Federation of Small Businesses and its engagement with this committee, and a summary note from that meeting can be found in pages 133 of your pack. Whilst there may be a range of views on the findings of the report as a whole, we are exploring it today insofar as it relates to the specific statutory role and work of this committee. Therefore, noting the work that has already been undertaken by the Committee for the Economy regarding the areas of the report which sit within its remit, members may now wish to explore how the Federation of Small Businesses recommendations might interact with this committee's consideration of the proposed and published replacement and new EU Acts for the purposes of Article 13.3a and Article 14 of the Windsor Framework. Members, you may also may wish to explore the Federation of Small Businesses' engagement with businesses and with the committee in support of that work. So I would very much welcome Roger Pollen, who is head of the Federation of Small Businesses. Roger, you're very welcome. Rachel McCorriston, head of policy within the Federation of Small Businesses, and Lorna Muldoon. She is the policy advisor on the Windsor Framework for the Federation of Small Businesses. So you are very welcome today, and just whenever you are ready, I would just ask you to brief the committee, so thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair.
And may I put on record our thanks for the invitation to come here today to share some aspects of our recent Windsor Framework Realities Report and how we believe some of its findings may assist this committee in its work. And can I also just at the start declare an interest as an appointed member of Intertrade UK. If I could just take a few minutes to set the scene and explain the background of the report that we're going to be discussing here today. So FSB is the largest membership organisation for self-employed, micro, small and medium business owners across the UK. And here in Northern Ireland, we have 6,000 members covering every business sector. As such a large representative body, we're frequently invited to bring forward evidence from our members. And in that context, we were invited, as you mentioned, to contribute to 2 inquiries by this committee at the end of last year and the beginning of this. And it immediately became clear that the process was not one through which business could make any meaningful impact to your work. So we recognised that that situation was deeply unsatisfactory for you as a committee and for FSB as the organisation to which businesses look to ensure that they're effectively represented. So in order to try and assist and improve the situation, we had a meeting with you, Chair and Vice Chair and clerks, and made some suggestions that we thought might support the consultation process and assist you in your work, specifically of examining and considering new and replacement EU acts. Now, shortly after that meeting, the UK Government undertook a consultation on the operation of the UK Internal Market Act, but they specifically excluded the Windsor Framework from the scope of the consultation. In parallel to that, we started from our field staff across GB, we started to get a lot of contacts highlighting the increasing inquiries and problems that businesses in their patch were expressing to them about trading with Northern Ireland. And we also saw a marked uptick in calls from Northern Ireland members, all related to the Windsor Framework and its operation. So that provided a lot of anecdotes that suggested there were increasing problems, but neither UK Government nor the Northern Ireland Executive nor any of the departments or agencies had gone out to ask business about their experiences and to establish the facts behind the anecdotes. And the UK Internal Market Act, as I said, the consultation had specifically excluded the Windsor Framework. So as FSB operates right throughout the UK, we felt it was our responsibility to undertake a survey of members to understand their experiences. And we got really good engagement from across England, Scotland, Wales and here in Northern Ireland, receiving a total of 778 responses, which you will have seen. But aside from the survey's own findings, the process also clarified some of the challenges in establishing a robust evidence base from which to contribute to your own inquiries in the future as you pursue your statutory functions in that examination and consideration of new EU acts and replacement EU acts. So we recognise that Brexit and the Northern Ireland Protocol and the Windsor Framework have been immensely emotive issues. FSB is agnostic on the politics of these issues and focuses instead on understanding and ideally improving the operating environment in which business finds itself. And in respect to the Northern Ireland Protocol and the Windsor Framework, we mapped our entire membership and had identified 5 clear cohorts: those for whom it works well, those who are largely unaffected, those who are largely unaware, those who are protected by grace periods, and those who are affected badly. All businesses fall into one of those cohorts. Some may be in more than one, but there's no 6th cohort. That was the entirety of our membership sat within those. So for FSB, and I suspect for others as well, we should be outraged that there are any businesses in that 5th cohort, those who are affected badly. Good businesses that have been laid low by a political construct that our report illustrates is simply not working as it should. So it would be utterly unacceptable to assume that just because there are examples of businesses that are unaffected or even prospering because of the Windsor Framework, we should ignore and condemn a minority that find themselves in that 5th cohort. So this report, this Windsor Framework Realities Report, identifies barriers and perceived barriers and the lived experience of respondents, but it also reflects on the issues raised and it proposes a range of recommendations for improvements and solutions. And it's within these that I would hope we may find ways of improving the situation for businesses and, importantly, assisting this committee in its work on future regulatory changes. So I think that's the context of how we got where we are, and we recognise the focus of this committee is different from others, and that hopefully what we've found by engaging with our members and building the evidence base here will be useful in assisting you in your future work. Thank you.
Okay, over to the floor. We have Steve Aiken.
Roger. Hi, everybody. Good to talk to you again. A couple of issues, and I thought it was a very well recorded report, and it was a very well sort of researched report. First question I have is about the issue about data. And we hear a lot of we spend a lot of time talking to sort of Europe. We spend an awful lot of time speaking to Westminster. Spend a lot of time sort of talking on sort of the political process, and everybody comes out with various statements, but it's very difficult to actually tie down the data on what's actually happening. And the only organisation that we can really see that has the real data about what's happening and the economic impacts of it is HMRC. But is there any way we can see that data? Because we're making lots of assumptions about what the impact of the Windsor framework is. But unless, and this is the first properly researched piece of documentation that we've actually seen, unless we actually have that degree of data from HMRC, how are we going to be able to establish whether there's true diversion or the impact on trade as we're having at the moment?
Thank you. I'm going to defer to colleagues in a second who are the ones who crunch all the data and understand what's going on. But I suppose, to your point, is our frustration was the fact that there are so many different parts of government that are disconnected. And so it's very, very hard to establish a true picture, because you have DEFRA, DERA, HMRC, you have the Trader Support Service, you have Northern Ireland departments, you have this whole panoply of bodies that all own a little slice and don't seem to be connected. So it's very, very hard to understand and interpret and extrapolate what the figures that we do see may actually mean, and therefore what problems they're either masking or addressing. So Joy and Rachel on this one as well.
Yeah, so I think the issue with the HMRC data, I would assume, is that they can't disclose it, because you could look at it and maybe say, oh, well, that's such and such a business, and then obviously you would have sensitive information. I think UK government, like everyone who kind of looks into issues in the economy, struggles to measure what's actually happening on the ground. Our work is just one piece of evidence, and we decided to go out and do this so that we had some numbers to back up what we were hearing, and in particular to understand the issues which GB-based businesses were having, or the perceived issues. And what's really useful, we've had quite a lot of engagement with UK government and with the Department for the Economy, and what is really useful in this report is the qualitative analysis, which gives some examples of what businesses are actually thinking. So we had around 20% of respondents actually took the time to provide more information as to what their issues were, and I think that gives there's a real value in that, in terms of providing that extra information as to what businesses are experiencing. And a survey is quite good because you can assess it at that moment in time. Obviously things change, and certain grace periods have ended since this survey was actually conducted. We actually had planned to go out with this survey on the 1st of April on purpose, because there was a deadline on the parcel side, and then that was moved. So we didn't get to capture anything from that side. I think there's real value in this, but would always encourage more data to be shared. And that's one of our key recommendations, is that UK government share more data as to what they're seeing. But then it's also very difficult to measure impacts, as anyone who's ever worked with statistics or collecting data would know. You always have to act with caution, but we would welcome any further data from the likes of HMRC, and we'll definitely be calling on it.
Sort of my next point was on the issue, and you mentioned about grace periods, because you've taken a snapshot at a particular point of time, but more grace periods have fallen, and now we know it'll be at least until 2027 at least before the SBS discussions are even begun. So we've got a period of time now where, in the words of the Secretary of State, he's going to push, and indeed some of our government ministers here are going to push for full, faithful implementation. Are you going to repeat this process at a sort of like a yearly interval, just to get a snapshot of where we are and what the implications are on sort of the business community?
I think it's a piece of work that ought to be repeated. The question is whether FSB does it, because this is a massive exercise for us, and it was after our meeting with yourselves we realised there is a problem here about how we go about informing you. And for us to engage with our membership. So we need to consider, what do we want to know from them, So we need expert input to shape the questions we're going to ask. Then we go out to them, we get the responses, then we analyse that, and then we share it. And the timelines that you were being asked to respond to your work made it quite clear to us that we couldn't assist you in that because it's a bigger piece of work. So we sort of hijacked a lot of time to map this out earlier this year. It took from April to June to go out and do this. The question is whether it needs to be done in exactly the same way, or whether better harvesting of existing data would contribute more knowledge to the process. But I think a regular repetition of this would be valuable to see, are things getting better? Are they getting worse? In what way are they changing? And really simply to inform the process and what needs to be done by whom to address that.
I accept that about FSB and probably the cost that was involved in it, but the beauty of somebody like FSB is doing it is you represent your members. You don't have any political bias or spin or a particular process. You're actually taking a truth track of what's on the ground.
I think that was and I'd say the colleagues will speak to sort of some of the anecdote that we'd harvested that led us to think we really do need to get the evidence and the data behind the anecdote. And we always caution that, people respond to surveys if they have an interest in them. So you sort of accept that there's a degree of self-selection in it, but nonetheless a big sample size, and they took the trouble to share their lived experience with us. So I think repetition of that would be a valuable contribution to the wider discussion and to your work.
Chair, with your indulgence, one final question. Obviously, one of the big things that's happening at the moment is the changes to the Union Customs Code. And there will be significant changes in how everything from is analysed, data sets, all the sort of processes around the process of being changed. So the Windsor framework was set at a set of regulations which was in the past, but now we've got a new set of regulations that are about to come through from the European Union, and those will apply to us, which in fact the Windsor framework never looked at because it was a set piece. So we're moving to a much evolved situation over the next couple of years. Has there been any indication amongst your members who have realised sort of what the tsunami coming in is going to be like and the implications it's likely to be?
Well, I was talking to one this morning on the way here, entirely coincidentally, and they are developing some really smart technologies to assist in that and make sure that business and trade can be on the front foot, not on the back foot. So there are technologies around, there's ambition around, and I think there's also an opportunity for simplification in the various data sets that are collected. But that probably requires a degree of coordination and conversation between UK government and the EU to see, can we find this common set? And that may be slightly at odds with pursuing full and faithful implementation of the old set, if you like, whilst there's an evolution of a new set coming along in parallel. So I think there's an opportunity there. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to add to that, I think a lot of the issue, like with that particular topic, is that businesses don't know about it until it's right upon them. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a similar scenario, quite like UKIM's declarations or ICS2, which is upcoming, and Surtex. A lot of members, I hear, they know about it now because it's in front of them and they have to deal with it. If there was more information coming out beforehand, they would be a lot more proactive, but a lot of businesses aren't in that position to seek out the information prior to it being on their front desk, really.
Yeah, it'd be good if we had a bit of curiosity about that as well. Yeah, there would be. And finally, thanks very much to the FSB for the job you've done. I thought it's been a first way of work. That's me finished, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. David?
Thanks very much, Chair. And I think the committee will all relate to the idea that we should have, or we could do with more information on the front end. Thank you for your presentation so far. I just want to. Lost what I was going to say there. I'll move on to my question. Just there, I'm going to quote from the report and a few questions coming out from that. So you've said that a number of NI businesses voiced frustration that dual market access feels more theoretical than real. The data points to a significant disconnect between political messaging and a business level understanding. Can I ask then, do you believe that dual market access, as framed by some political parties, which is full access to both markets, is actually feasible? And Roger, you've indeed said that the UK market is increasingly closing. Is that the reality, and how does that play into what we've asked?
I'll pick it up and then colleagues can come in on it. But I think that the concept of dual market access ought to be really exciting and enticing and ought to give Northern Ireland a strategic edge as a difference, and therefore it ought to be embraced. The reality is that businesses here have had dual market access since 1992. the Single Market Act came in. So they've had that access. So to tell them now that you've still got what you've always had isn't a very enticing, exciting offering.
Is it not worse than that, Roger? Is the fact that we keep talking about dual market access, but it's not really dual market access, not to the full extent that people would like to portray it. Well, and that is perhaps the reason why we haven't seen a wealth of international businesses jumping on it as people suspected.
I think that there are two parts to this, though. So that for businesses here, I don't think it's a big thing. It's what they've always had, and it's just got a bit more difficult. So I can understand the response there. The reality, though, is that dual market access should be a really exciting opportunity for Northern Ireland to seize businesses from the rest of the world who want to access both UK and EU markets. 500 million consumers. This is the place to be based for manufacturing businesses, people who are creating goods, because this only affects goods in the main. And I think we're in the foothills of articulating that offer and getting out and really promoting it. And we've been calling on UK government to put it at the front of their international trade deals and so on, is to say that we want to do a deal, but there's a special place that we can actually give you access to the EU as well, not just to the UK market. So they have that in their locker, and I don't think they're necessarily on the front foot in using it. Locally, we're aware that it's become I think I said in my remarks, we're agnostic to the politics of this. We try and deal with the situation we find, and the situation we find is that the access to the rest of the UK is broadly speaking fine. But bringing stuff in from GB into Northern Ireland is the problem. So if you're bringing stuff in, processing it and sending it back out, we've got an awful lot of problems in here. And I think what our focus is on is how do we reduce the frictions in that? How do we try and bring forward ideas that will give a reality to the UK internal market so it can operate in its own right as it's intended to do, and then also as a separate exercise harness and dual market access to boost our inward investment. I think that's where we're sitting. If there's any other financing to that.
Just to come in on that, I think a lot of the frustration that came through in the survey when it came to dual market access was that, businesses are facing issues in terms of getting their goods from GB, in terms of losing suppliers, knowing what compliance they need to do. And I think the frustration was, we're hearing about dual market access, but I've got these issues. So I think
barriers.
Really,
and if there's barriers, it's not full dual market access.
But I think that it's the barriers in terms of getting goods from GB. It's GB suppliers who are either saying there are barriers or they perceive there to be barriers, so they just decide not to supply. So that's a lot of the issues around how information is shared. And one of our key recommendations is that businesses have access to clear and concise information so they know what they need to do or what their suppliers need to do. And I think that's something that would address so many of the issues that come through this this report is just down to lack of information available. Businesses are frustrated by going onto websites where they're clicking through 9, 10, 15 times just to try and get an answer, and often the answer's not there. So I think addressing kind of that information gap would kind of improve sentiment quite a lot from the businesses. But I think dual market access is a huge opportunity to promote Northern Ireland, and that's something that we have been doing. Roger has been doing it with companies in the US who have asked about dual market access, and Roger has been promoting it. But I think there's a real opportunity. There is,
and I think we just need to get everybody saying, okay, we need to get behind this, set aside any political differences on it. There is an opportunity here. What are we going to do? How are we going to shape it? How are we going to push it? So as Rachel says, we are actually hopefully taking a delegation of businesses out to the States and bringing other ones back in as part of that process. And we've used some of the material that the Department for the Economy has produced to support that, but we've put our own narrative on it. I mean, Belfast is the second largest English-speaking city in the European single market for goods. Who knew that? Who's put that out there? But it's an asset that we ought to be able to make use of. So I think it's a work in progress.
Well, listen, dual market access in theory is of course wonderful if everything works swimmingly well and is in the proper context and with the context being cost to that as well. So I don't think anyone's disagreeing with it in theory. I think my own personal thought, and I understand you're politically agnostic on it. For me, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig to some degree. So we need to do some work on the actual how it actually works before we can publicise it properly, because I think a lot of businesses are seeing through that. Could I then just another quote from the paper is the most common response to the Windsor framework barriers is for firms to stop trading with Northern Ireland. 32% of GB businesses reported that they had ceased trading with Northern Ireland due to compliance burdens or operational friction. How do you think that's impacting on consumer choice on parts, components, goods by businesses within Northern Ireland? You've commented on slightly there in your previous answer, but how do you think that's happening?
Go first on that. I think in two ways. So one is there will be a reduction in choice, but the other thing is there's a distortion in the market because people will still get stuff, and so you will find that they will turn to bigger businesses that have the capacity to put in place customs clearance agencies and so on like this. So you will find that the frictions actually end up damaging small business disproportionately compared to big business. And we are aware of one particularly large wholesale operator that's got several different outlets, many outlets here, but under different brands, who has seen a big uptick in their sales here. So they're obviously being able to take some market share away from smaller businesses that have backed away from the market because of the actual or perceived difficulties. So if you then look at, to your point, Mr. Ricken, if you look at the data behind that, you may see that the trade is still broadly speaking at the same level. But the detail behind it, there's damage being done that's not necessarily visible, and unfortunately nobody's been looking for the damage. That's part of the problem.
We know with larger businesses, more of that money tends to go outside of Northern Ireland rather than stay in it, as is the case with many of our small businesses. Could I just, again, another quote, just manufacturers were amongst the hardest hit according to the survey, with many reporting burdensome paperwork, delays and cost inflation linked to goods moving between GB and NI. Compliance obligations included customs declarations, at-risk assessments and rules of origin documentation. Some businesses stated that these requirements had slowed or fractured supply chains. Can I ask, do you agree with the Road Haulage Association and others that answer that a lot of the protocol's problems for future arrangements to deal with the perversity and all the trade in goods coming from GBDNI is deemed at risk of entering the EU single market? And do we not need to turn that aside? Do you believe that's possible without legal change in Brussels?
Yeah, well, sorry, go ahead.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the sentiment of that is that it's the cumulative burden of these things, and a lot of those declarations can be duplicated as well. And if you go through the UKIM, if you try not to go through the red lane and go through UKIMs, but then you also need to do an ICS declaration for something different or a Surtex declaration for something different. A lot of this can be duplicated effort and resources which SMEs really don't have. To turn that on its head, I think it is possible, but it comes back to guidance and to have streamlined, simplified guidance, kind of a one-stop shop, because as I said, a lot of that effort can be duplicated, and rather where you go through the Trader Support Service or not, some of those reviews are mixed, as you can see in the report. But I think if we had one area where small businesses could go to, because in some instances it's a simple question, or they deem it to be a simple question, but there's not a very simple answer to it, or there's not a simple way to gain an answer to it. I think if we were to have a one-stop shop of getting guidance on how to actually carry out these procedures and these declarations, it would be a lot simpler, and we could turn that on its head.
Thanks very much. And just one more briefly, Chair, if you can, and it's to come back to what I'd forgotten at the start, which was to sympathise with what Steve was saying around understanding whether you are either the right place or have the capacity to continue doing reports like this and where that should sit. I think this committee has agreed, we've had discussions before, that the UK government needs to put much more resource into this, much more engagement in Brussels as well as at Whitehall, and I think most of us agree on that point at least. Could I ask where you think, if because I do share some of Steve's concerns as well, that government, I'm not sure entirely, I would trust them not to have their own narrative with that. Mm-hmm. Could I ask whether you think it would sit well with Intertrade UK, or where else you think that might sit if properly resourced by government?
There's several issues. Touching on your earlier one there as well, I think there was frustration amongst businesses that with issues such as their tax return and their VAT return, they're trusted to get on and trade, and then report retrospectively as to what they've done. And yet with the arrangements that are here, there is no trust, and everything has to be verified and documented up front, otherwise the trade doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I think that's where there's a real frustration, and that's where I think we need to try and move things onto a more mature footing, because the Windsor framework, when all's said and done, is only for the law-abiding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're already law-abiding and you're a proper business doing all your records, why do we make it so difficult? That, I think, has been one of the things that's come through in the reporting. To the other point about what does government's role in this, or what is government's role in this? UK government is the signatory with the EU on this deal, so it has to be the one that takes responsibility, and also has the one that has the capacity. But the need for a one-stop shop isn't just to find an easy place to get advice, it's finding a single source of the truth on which you have legal certainty. Because if you take a decision on the basis of advice that you got from some part of government that's not consistent with another, which one are you going to have legal certainty on if that ends up in a court or a tribunal or whatever it might be? So I think that's why there's a real importance to getting the accessible front end of what should be a huge operation behind the scenes to understand where regulations are evolving, where they're changing, what does that mean for business here? Does the UK choose to follow the EU regulation when it's learned what's happening, think actually that's a good idea, we'll follow that, or we're going to be divergent from it, and then this is how we manage that divergence, and what's the implication for Northern Ireland? So again, back to the point about informing you as a committee, how you can make those considerations of whether this is an issue that will impact communities or not. You need a lot of knowledge coming in upstream to make that assessment, and to get input from people like ourselves or other sectoral organisations to inform your process.
No, thank you, Roger. And I think on that, you're singing all of our song in terms of what we push back to the British government, and the need for that information to allow us to do our job as well as organisations like yourself. Thank you, Chair.
Just a very small. It's interesting you said about trusted trader. Quite a few of them have said to me, why am I a trusted trader for everything else except I'm not trusted for this? Why aren't I trusted? I'm trusted to deal with the United States, I'm trusted to deal with Australia. What's the difference here? And that's been a lot of frustration has been had to me, and also the cost that's getting involved in it. Yeah.
Just before we move on, can I just remind members, obviously, it's when I ask specific questions specific to the committee, and I'm conscious there's pertinent issues, but in relation to the implementation, there's other committees, and that's their role. So I want to use your time as pertinent as possible, could just remind members to kind of remain specific questions to the role of the committee. And it's my role as chair to ensure that as a committee we get as much advice and information from yourselves in relation to our role and our statutory role. So just a quick reminder, and I'll move on now to Peter.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks very much for coming in, folks. It's a brilliant report, and let's get that on the record. Really, really good. I think the value of it is the agnosticism, if I can put it that way, that Roger has expressed, that it's non-political. I wouldn't be so agnostic either politically or theologically, I'd have to say, but that notwithstanding. I'm going to read a couple of figures out and then go to a question, if that's okay. When asked how the Windsor framework had affected business, 61% businesses reported a negative impact of the respondents who move goods or sell services between GB and NI, which we've just talked about, that pressure and the barriers from GB to NI. A third had already ceased supplying customers or partners in either Great Britain or Northern Ireland due to trade barriers. And I'll give one example of that. My mum uses my mum must be appalled now that I'm going to use her example, but she does watch this committee sometimes. She gets a very specific hair conditioner. She's 88. She has better hair than I have, and also more hair than I have, but she gets a very specific product, and she said, Peter, would you get me some more? And I get this yearly, and this year I couldn't get it from GB. There was a number of suppliers in GB, and it was not for onward sale to Northern Ireland or whatever that thing comes up on eBay or Amazon, whatever it is. And I had to get it for her from Australia, 10 of these wee things from Australia, because nobody in GB would send it to me. Now, I don't know if that's framework related, but I do know that every year that she asks me to get these things, every year up till now, I've been able to get them. And I think it's useful just giving that one example, that this does have real impacts for consumers who want to purchase stuff from from GB into Northern Ireland. And then the onward impact, sorry, let me just get the onward impact. Taken together, 57% of respondents anticipate moderate or significant new trade frictions. And obviously we've talked about the fact that some of these micro businesses don't have the capacity to look at this stuff coming down their tracks. They're relying on others. Essentially, I got to the recommendations page of your report, and there was 12, okay? So I suppose my first question is, how confident do you think that the recommendations that you have made will get traction, either with government here or Westminster or in Brussels? If I could start off with that.
Yeah, I'm actually going to ask Lorna because she conflates the two of those of all of the regulation that's coming down the track that may have contributed to that statistic about people concerned that it's going to get worse, but also because she sort of carries a nice mental record of the people with whom we've engaged on this to try and make sure that we do get traction. So.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry for your mother and her troubles. Wouldn't want that for her.
We got it from Australia. It was expensive, but mother's love, it's just the absolute priority. So there you go.
I think her troubles are probably worse than...
they're significantly worse than mum's, yeah. Sorry.
To use my own mother's anecdote, she wasn't able to get a tumble dryer from GB. So
Right,
there's an
okay.
issue.
We should get our mums together sometime,
should.
Lorna. Yeah, sure. A cup of coffee.
But no, we've spoken to the Consumer Council about these issues as well, and they share a similar sentiment to our report, that this is something that's not just coming down the tracks. I think a couple of months ago and this time a year ago we were talking about the potential future impacts, that this could potentially be a problem, that consumers in Northern Ireland won't be able to get goods. We are now in that era. It's not a future thing anymore. I think given, as you raised there, the 57% who anticipate future frictions, there's still more to come, which is very unfortunate. But to your question on our recommendations and traction for our recommendations, we have had significant correspondence with different strains of government. So we give initial findings to the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee, who have also been engaging on our report since it was published. We have met with DBT, who said that they have been looking at the report at length. We've also met with the Economy Minister, with Intertrade Ireland, HMRC, and there has been significant debate on it in the House of Commons as well. So I think it is getting various traction. Whether there's buttons being pressed on that, we're yet to see. But I think the majority of people who we've spoken to have a certain form of consensus on the findings, and we know even when we met with the Committee for the Economy back in July, there was a consensus on our recommendations as well, which was really nice to hear. So I think everyone that we've spoken to is on the same page. We just need to get more traction and movement to actually push these things forward.
I think also, sorry, on that, the Northern Ireland Scrutiny Committee and the House of Lords did a lot of work on this, I think, and they they had the Secretary of State and Minister Nick Thomas-Symonds and used the report, I think, for a lot of the questioning there. And I understand that they are due to report imminently on the inquiry they've been carrying out. So hopefully, with all of these small steps, we will move some degree forward.
Okay. I'll come back to that in a second. I have one other question. I will reflect back to that. Just one quote from the report as well. Businesses were asked to reflect on the quality and accessibility of government support relating to the Windsor framework. You cited a couple, HMRC, DEFRA, DERA, Trader Support Service, and the feedback was clear and consistent. Current support is falling short of expectations. Is that currently still the situation, or has, since the report was written, has that improved?
My sense is that since the report was written, it's probably gone worse, because a few extra things have come in since then. So phase 3 labelling came in on the 1st of July, the changes to postal services came in, and I think there was also a comment by the Minister that the government was aware of lack of compliance in certain areas, which we took some exception to, because if the government is aware of lack of compliance, then the government must be complicit in the lack of compliance. So we thought that was a signal that there was going to be a tightening of something that had been allowed to happen, and things were going to get more difficult. So we continue to engage and to try and get the advice and guidance early enough to assist people through the processes that they're having to clear.
Okay, so they've moved from a C to D minus then in terms of where they're at. That's fine. Final thing, Chair, if that's okay, is just taking you back to the recommendations and probably actually what the Chair sort of made clear and completely right in what she said in terms of this committee and its role. Is it possible, so clearly in your recommendations, they're quite comprehensive and there's 12 of them. Would you be able to strip through those and pull out specific points that this committee could be helpful in? Okay, so the report isn't written for this committee. It's written for a wide range of audiences, and you don't have to do it now. I'm not going to ask you to even unless you want to comment on it, you don't have to. But I'd be very keen if you'd have a look through those recommendations and strip out stuff that we could take on, and we will, as long as there's committee agreement around it, to see what we can do regarding those 12 points. Would you be able to do that? And you don't have to comment, but you're very welcome to.
The short answer is yes, we will. I would say that the overarching one is one we talked about earlier in the year, which is this idea of an Office of Regulatory Divergence. I think there would be commonality in your specific brief as this committee, rather than just committees in Stormont generally. This committee, I think, would be greatly enhanced in its work by having an Office of Regulatory Divergence with all the heft of UKG, the proper resourcing, and then from our perspective, sort of bolted onto that is what we think of as the shiny front end. It's the one-stop shop where that knowledge can then inform businesses to give that single source of the truth and the legal certainty on which they can then proceed. So that would be a quick answer, and we'll do a piece of work on that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, just to put on record, the dual market access recommendations, we're going to be working with the Department for the Economy on them as well. There's correspondence coming up very soon to get some actualisation on those recommendations.
And just to say that the one which Roger mentioned, recommendation 10, which is on the Office for Regulatory Divergence, we have written a paper on that, which we shared with the House of Lords and Scrutiny Committee. They had requested that we draw out more information on that, so I'm sure we'd be happy to send it to the committee.
Just to say, there is a link to that paper in your pack.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Declan?
Thanks, Ciara, and you're all very welcome. Thanks for coming along this morning and for sharing the report. You were previously in the Economy Committee, and our party representatives said at that stage that we fully supported all of the recommendations in your report. I'd like to reiterate that today, and as other colleagues have commented on, it's a very useful report. It's very focused, and I think I'd like to begin by making the observation that you have brought a pragmatic and a solution-focused approach to these issues. I wouldn't have expected anything less, but that's clearly codified in the report itself. Now, of course, Ciara makes the point that we are restricted by a remit, so not all of the recommendations are within the remit of this committee, but nevertheless, we have to see this in holistic terms. I note the comment in the report where you make the point that this is not a case of inevitable decline, but it is a call to action. For that reason, I think your report is very timely in that respect. Roger, yourself and Lorna commented on the simplification process, and I was going to ask specifically about that, but earlier in your comments you spoke about the one-stop shop idea, and Rachel, you've talked about the regulatory divergence office. So my first question is, and this does overlap to some extent with some of the earlier conversation, to what extent are you detecting a reception within the British government for the establishment of that type of one-stop shop that could in fact become the clearinghouse to optimise simplification, to deal with particular issues that are coming in from different businesses, different sectors, and then addressing them in a complete way in one centre?
I think There's a general recognition that this is a reasonable and reasoned set of assessment of the challenges and proposal of potential solutions. And everybody, therefore, is reasonably warm to it. The challenge, I think, though, is that it needs to come right from top of government so that it has all of the input from the various agencies and departments that it needs, so as to be able to give you as a committee and your functions a single overview and fully comprehensive assessment of regulatory changes. And then what we think of as the shiny front end, the one-stop shop, the advice that can then provide to businesses. So it's sort of two sides of the same coin. There seems to be no great resistance to it, but no great momentum to it. And I think that's where we would very much hope. So the Economy Committee earlier in the year, I think, endorsing recommendations. I think they said they were going to write to the Secretary of State about that. I think this committee almost demanding it in order for you to be able to fulfill your functions, I think would greatly assist our efforts. We're just a business organisation trying to articulate the needs and wishes of our members. But I think actually the part of it that helps you do your work should hopefully mean you can get behind those recommendations, and then collectively we may have a greater chance of advancing them.
I see the wisdom of that. I mean, it takes me back to earlier days of the post-Brexit landscape when I was a minister in the executive office, and at that point in time, as we navigated that landscape, we talked with our own officials about the importance of trying to grip this, bring it into one house, and then in a very coherent way make the case to the British government to make the necessary changes. So I do think that's an important suggestion being made by FSB to ourselves, so that we are seeing committees speak with one voice, that we have a TEO that speaks with one voice, and that's escalated to the highest level of the British government to ensure that the policy intent is cascaded into practical action. My last comment and question, Ciara, if you don't mind, is to ask what specific sectors are most impacted by the communication and logistical problems that you've identified?
We come back to that in a moment. Just to finish on your previous point, I think there's absolutely no disrespect to if you call it the dormant departments and structures about saying this needs to be done at Westminster. It's because Westminster was the signatory to the agreement, and it controls HMRC and DEFRA and so on like that. So that's why it has the resource and the heft to do the job there. So whilst departments here are doing a good job with the information they get, they're further down the chain and they can't control and direct and give that legal certainty. So that's why we've sort of landed in there. And I think one of the time you're referring to, I think one of the really powerful interventions was when First and Deputy First Ministers wrote in August 2016, I think, to Theresa May to set out what Northern Ireland wanted in the subsequent Brexit negotiations. So I think that intervention on a sort of cross-party basis, if you like, is where we think we can get traction and leverage again with these committees coming together and saying, actually, this is what we need for our businesses to work and our consumers to be able to access what they need. And we are coming together to make that demand. I think that will have a huge leverage way beyond anything that any of us can bring individually to it.
If I can just respond briefly to that, Roger, I agree. And that's the kind of momentum that I think can advance this kind of proposal. This is a subjective observation, but based upon past experience, I actually think that if we can bring that type of unanimity and momentum to bear, there will be a reception on the side of the European Commission in relation to practical, pragmatic, solution-focused processes that they can add value to ensure that we do in fact have frictionless opportunities for local businesses.
I think we're very much common purpose in that. To your second question, if I may, the specific sectors, it's probably a movable feast because it depends which regulations have kicked in at what point. Mm-hmm. But I think that the one that's particularly always feeling difficulty is to do with SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary, and anything related to that, food. You see the issues that the big supermarkets are having. Marks and Spencer's have been very vocal about the challenges that they face. If you then think what a small business, a delicatessen with a broad range of products is having to navigate to try and keep on making sure that the availability of unusual things continues, because it's the unusualness of their product range that is their unique selling point. So to be able to navigate that as a small business and ramp up the capacity is a huge ask, and that's I suspect is probably the sector that feels the greatest pressure. But there are other ones, and it does ebb and flow depending how the regulations are being changed or amended or postponed.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Just check, is Jonathan or Emma, are you okay if there's any questions? You okay?
Hi, Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, Jonathan.
Thank you. Most questions have been covered, but I just wanted to touch on something with Roger. Following your presentation to the Economy Committee, and it's important that other members have had a chance through the remit of this committee, but there was some dismissive comments towards the report that it wasn't representative. Do you have any comments on that, given the length and the time that was put into designing such a report?
I think we stand over it. That's the first thing. I think if you look at any surveys, I was looking actually at interesting parallels and thinking we all extrapolate out what might happen at the next general election, typically based on about 1,000, on polling of about 1,000 people. We estimate what 48 million people might do at the subsequent election. So I think for us to bring forward 788 businesses engaging with this, with all the caveats that we put in, such as of those who responded to the survey. So recognising there's a degree of self-selection in there, nonetheless, it is far too big a sample size taken right across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland of businesses who took the trouble and time out of their working lives to share their story. I think it's far too big a sample to say that it's anything other than robust, reflective and important to the debate.
Read.
No, thank you for that. And I think one of the most frustrating aspects for the committee has been to gather that bit of knowledge from GB businesses in particular, because the information flow is very difficult for us sitting here in Northern Ireland making decisions to understand how that might affect trade for GB businesses into Northern Ireland. So I think it's important, and this is a first real in-depth effort to try to extrapolate that out to give us a greater understanding. Just with your different hat on, and it is related obviously to trying to deal with some of these issues, how is things going so far with Intertrade UK, and do you believe that findings such as this report will help its work in informing GB businesses and helping them also to lobby with the UK government to ensure that there's change that enables free unfettered trade within the United Kingdom?
Well, thanks for the question. I am here with my FSB hat on, and I suppose what I would say is that we engage with any organisation or body that might be able to move forward or give oxygen to the issues that businesses are experiencing. Intertrade is one of those. Office for the Internal Market we've also engaged with, as Lorna said, Department for Business and Trade. Whoever needs to have this on their radar and might be able to move it forward, we've engaged with. With Intertrade, there's a work programme in place which includes engaging with the Secretary of State on the issues, and Intertrade has had a briefing on this report, as have many others. So the knowledge and the information it brought forward is well recognised.
Okay, and I'm not attempting to draw you into remarks purely from an Intertrade perspective, but I'm just trying to understand. So they have received the report from the FSB. Are other businesses, what's the way in which they communicate and interact with an organisation such as Intertrade, which can help deal with some of the issues in the report?
Well, there are other business members on it, so the Chamber of Commerce and the CBI and the Institute of Directors, so there's representation from business organisations on it. I think what's interesting is that having been the lightning rod, I suppose, with this report from April to June, and people were aware that the research was being done. We've now seen a lot of other business organisations identifying the same issues and same stresses and strains within their memberships, and there's a lot of frustration around, and we're hearing that on the sort of various joint fora that we sit on now with agencies such as HMRC, that those other bodies are bringing in a lot of lived experience from their members that really echoes what we've been finding. So I don't think you're seeing that our report is an outlier. I think perhaps it just happened to be in the vanguard, and others are now adding to the debate and discussion and the information.
So finally, we have raised continually in the Assembly issues that have had a direct impact on consumers and small businesses in Northern Ireland, whether it's access to the supply chain for small businesses and how that's affecting their viability, but also for the consumer and how they have been denied access. I think Peter has mentioned one specific example in relation to his mother, but you can extrapolate that out across so many different sectors
Yeah.
where people are facing, barriers to access to the GB market,
Yeah.
which is often costing greater amounts. So can I ask, how do you believe that this report interacts with the Murphy Review? And what is it going to take for GB businesses to gain confidence again that they can trade freely into Northern Ireland? What's that going to take? What sort of action?
I'll ask Rachel maybe to touch on the correlation with the Murphy report.
And I'll pass to Lorna, who's done all the work analysing it. I'm not going to take any credit.
Yes,
That's good coordination, guys.
teamwork there. No, thank you for your question. We welcomed Lord Murphy's report and we do see it as a stepping stone in the right direction. It mirrors a lot of our findings and our recommendations. I think Lord Murphy's report called for an all-in-one service, which we've called the one-stop shop. It also called for a trusted scheme of sorts, specifically for hauliers, but we would like to open that out for all traders. Also wanted more capacity and resources for yourselves and other stormont departments to interact with the Windsor framework. We would like to see more tangible recommendations, something which we can all hold in both hands and go forward with. But we do welcome Lord Murphy's report and the similarities that it has with our own.
Okay, but do you accept that whilst EU law continues to apply to large swathes of our economy, that ultimately trade divergence and barriers will still exist whilst that's in place?
I think that we, as I mentioned earlier, the agnostic approach to it, we deal with what we find. It's for politicians to change what is there. And we try not to get drawn into that. If that's the situation that exists, then the appetite amongst businesses to say, okay, well, how can we turn that to our advantage? That's where dual market access ought to be a factor, because there is a difference and we should be looking to squeeze that difference to our advantage. At the moment, that's not happening as much as it could be, so there's an opportunity there. Equally, if we see the convergence of the SPS deal that we were hearing about earlier, at that point you will see a reduction in those differences, and it will be easier to trade between GB and Northern Ireland, but that will also correspondingly reduce our advantage through dual market access. So I think there's a moment in time now to maximise the situation we find now, and we need to look at how do we change that situation to the better, to improve it and make sure that this committee can do its work, so that, as you say, Mr. Buckley, if the agreement between UKG and the EU is as it is now, that we are subject to those rules, that this committee can then at least have a very serious engagement in making sure those rules don't negatively impact businesses here.
I sense there is a greater appetite for businesses to tackle this issue, and I understand, there is political dimensions to this, and people will have different political viewpoints. It's not for business sectors to involve themselves in that, but they have, with increasing voice, demonstrated their ability to speak out and make tangible change. So I look, for example, at the car dealership issue, for example. That was a sector that we're facing. I constantly hear dual market access is the best of both worlds. To quote at the committee, it was the worst of both worlds. And it's not just car dealers that are facing that. There's other sectors that are facing increased bureaucracy both ways as a result of a deal that prioritised European access over the GB market, which ultimately was integral to their business models. And that challenge still exists. But would you be of the view that with increasing voice, businesses in Northern Ireland are having the bravery to speak out on the issues affecting their businesses from a business perspective? Do you feel that the Stormont apparatus, whether it's the Economy Committee, Infrastructure, Agriculture, we deal with them all at this committee because of the broad remit, do you feel that they have the understanding of how to navigate that to ensure that their voice is heard?
Well, I think that the very fact of business becoming more vocal and putting its head above the parapet increasingly to raise concerns, if that's different from what has gone before that, should be a signal to everybody that there's a really big problem here. Yep. Because business generally doesn't like to get into that mix. It gets on with what it does and so on. But I think that whenever business is raising concerns about anything, not just Windsor Framework, not just here, whether it's you see it in terms of AI and cyber in other places, or you see it in financial regulation, you're seeing it in the water service in England today. There's lots of times when business finally gets to a point where it just has to get into the political sphere and raise concerns about it. And I think that's what we're seeing here. And I think that the danger is, or the concern is, that if people don't, because of the politics of it, that they then shoot the messenger. And I think that we want to make sure that doesn't happen. And that's why, rather than relying on anecdote, of which we were picking up an awful lot, we felt we had to go out and get evidence, and that's what this report is about. It's saying the anecdote was the canary in the mine, that there was something wrong. Then the report is the evidence that lies behind that.
Okay. Thank you, Roger, Lorna and Rachel, and thank you, Chair, for giving me a bit extra time. Thank you.
Hey, Jonathan. Emma?
Thanks very much, Chair. I wasn't actually going to come in, but I just felt that I had to respond to Jonathan's very clearly comment regarding myself when he referred to other members having been dismissive of the report, which was never wasn't what I said, and is not reflective of, I think, anybody's reaction to the report when it was presented to the Economy Committee. I suppose we just wanted to ensure that the reference that you have concluded the report with, in terms of the fact that the data wasn't weighted, and that you yourselves understand that businesses are more likely to respond to the survey if they've been affected. Therefore, potentially some of the percentages will be overstated, and I feel that with all of these with all of the evidence that we gather from businesses and from affected communities, that perspective is always included, and that the context is referenced. And I think that that's important, because what our business community does not need is uncertainty or in any way scaremongering or panicking. It's really important that we hear the challenges, and as my party colleague has already outlined, we're supportive of your recommendations. Obviously, they're not within our gift, most of them, but we will do whatever we can to promote that with all governments who are involved. But it's just important that's included, and I think it's vital that we remain mindful of that context. And obviously, you have outlined it very explicitly yourselves in the report.
Thank you.
Can I just respond to that? So I think there's always stuff goes on in debates and discussions. We were actually very encouraged by you, Ms. Sheeran, and your comments in that other committee about the fact that there was general agreement within the committee for the recommendations, because that's what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to take the politics out of it and say, okay, here's what we could do to make the situation that's evidenced in the report better than it is now. The more people we can get behind that, the more we can get that sense of momentum. So we always enjoy a good discussion about the veracity and the accuracy of things, and I always turn to Rachel when it comes to any matters of weighting or other interpretation of data. But I think the report is what it is, and I think it's moving the dial, and I think the ambition is to get everybody behind it, these recommendations, just to move it forward a bit further than it is at the moment.
Thank you. Can I thank Roger, Rachel and Lorna just for your presentation this morning. I think just from the questions that have been asked, we do really appreciate the work that you are doing on behalf of small businesses across the north and of the GB, and the ongoing work that you are doing and the level of engagement. And as I say, from February, it's really good, as you're aware. It is about how our businesses can be more informed, first of all, and having that place where they can have information that they can stand over. And it's a one-stop shop that can enable them and support them to navigate any issues that they either perceive or may have going forward. So we really appreciate you highlighting it, and on behalf of the committee, can we thank you for your work and for coming along here this morning. It's much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We've members are content, could I ask members, are they content that we forward the Hansard of this session, once available, to the British Government, noting that a number of recommendations in the Federation of Small Businesses report could potentially impact the level of information available to the committee when considering proposed and published EU acts within its scope?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, thank you, members. And in addition, are members content to forward the Hansard once available to the Committee for the Economy and the House of Lords NI Scrutiny Committee? Okay, thank you, members. If you're content now, we'll move on to item number 6, which is correspondence. Members, I'm going to take items 6.1 and 6.2 together as both correspondence from the British Government, which are partially interrelated, if that's okay with members. So item 6.1 is at page 175 of your meeting pack, and it's a response on the proposed regulation on toy safety. The committee has been gathering evidence on the proposal in anticipation of a likely notification once it's published. The provisionally agreed text of the proposal is expected to be adopted in mid-November, after which it will be published in the official journal. In addition to this exchange, I had wrote to the First and Deputy First Minister, if you can recall, back in June, to restate the committee's position that it expects to be told whether or not a replacement act will have an impact as far as the minister's official responsibilities are concerned, regardless of whether the policy is reserved, and asked for that information to be provided. So a response is still awaited, and the Secretariat understands that it's still with ministers for consideration. And then item 6.2, which is at page 180 of your meeting pack, so it's correspondence to the clerks. It provides an update from the Cabinet Office on the provision of information to the committee, following engagement undertaken by the clerk as part of the committee's review of operations earlier in the year. Engagement was also undertaken with the Executive Office, and a similar update from TEO officials is expected. So again, the Secretariat understands that it's still being considered by ministers. Members will note that the toy safety proposal is used as an example through the British Government's response to the clerks. So off the back of that, the Secretariat has therefore requested information on what departmental engagement was conducted when the original EM was drafted. Cabinet Office has confirmed that the Executive Office was contacted back in October 2023 to check whether it had an interest in the EM and whether it wished to provide any views on the proposal. No issues were raised by TEO at that time. Using that information, the committee may wish to follow up on its last letter to the First and Deputy First Minister in order to reiterate that a response is still expected urgently, and to seek confirmation of what steps were taken in both when the department was contacted in 2023 and also since the committee's first request in February to exchange relevant departments and or to engage relevant departments and properly assess the impact it may have had, including by seeking views from departments on its impact, particularly on public health and the local economy. So more broadly, the committee has already agreed to factor the inputs received and those that we're still awaiting into our consideration of the recommendations set out in the independent review. The committee will therefore consider these responses and those which are still awaited again in the round as part of its informal planning session later in the autumn. So just at this stage, members, are you content to note both pieces of correspondence and to write to the First and Deputy First Minister on the basis of what I've just outlined?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, members. Items 6.3 to 6.5 are all copies of correspondence from the House of Lords NI Scrutiny Committee to the British Government. Item 6.3 at pages 184 of your pack relates to Regulation EU 2024-1252, establishing a framework for ensuring a secure and sustainable supply of critical raw materials. Are members content to note?
No.
Yeah, thank you, members. Item 6.4, it's at page 187 and it relates to veterinary medicines and the Windsor framework. Are members content to note? Thank you, members. Item 6.5 at pages 191 relates to the Scrutiny Committee's inquiry on the Windsor framework. The Scrutiny Committee states that it will address issues relating to the independent review of the Windsor framework and stakeholder engagement in its forthcoming report. Are members content to note?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, members. So move on to item 6.6. It's page 198 and it's a copy of correspondence from the Secretary of State to the Committee for the Economy regarding the local retail car market. The Committee for the Economy had written to him after considering the oral evidence from the National Franchise Dealers Association in July. So I'm conscious, David, are you...
Just whenever you're finished.
Just our members content to note at this stage?
Well, I was just going to say, having looked at the correspondence, I welcome the UK government's move to and commitment to align with EU regulations in the current context. And we'll obviously want to see the outworkings of that, and the detail has to be seen, and so reserving judgment on that. But I think in general, in the current context, it's a welcome move, and just to put that on record.
Thank you, David. And as members happy then to note, yes, thank you, members. So move on to the next item, and it's item number 7, chairperson's business, and I have no chairperson's business. And just moving on, any other business? Do members have any other business?
No.
Okay, thank you, members. So item number 9, the date, time and place of next meeting. Members, the committee has not been notified today in relation to any published EUX, therefore there will be no meeting of the committee next week. The next meeting has been scheduled for Thursday, the 16th of October at 10 AM in room 30. Okay, members, and the meeting is now adjourned. So thank you.
Thank you.
Committee Room 30. Sound.